Many years ago now, I went to a workshop, as one does, and it was one of those workshops where they ask you questions that you then have to sort yourselves into groups over, which I hate. I'm just going to say that right away. Sometimes if the questions are pretty straightforward, that's fine, but this one was not one of those. I didn't like the question that we were asked, which I'm getting to. The question we asked, and I may be misremembering the exact wording here, but it was something like whether you think you have a vivid imagination or not, which I think can feel like an insult either way, right? You're either a daydreamer or somebody who's very boring, is sort of how I heard that, which I don't think is true of any of us. I think we are both of those things all together. But in any way, we were asked to sort of sort ourselves. And I confess that I don't remember much about the rest of the workshop, including what the point of that exercise was. I know the workshop as a whole was supposed to be about problem solving and thinking creatively about challenges. But the question just left me thinking about it exclusively for the next hour or so. As I said, I don't like these sort of questions. I'm always sort of wondering what the point is of what the two categories are going to do next, what we're going to be asked to do, or is it just to make us think about this, which it certainly succeeded in that because I'm still thinking about it all these years later, I guess. And I confess, even as somebody who leads workshops sometimes, I am often a reluctant participant in some of these group exercises because I'm worried what they're going to make us do, right? What am I going to have to do now? What are you trying to get me into? It would be helpful to me if you would sort of explain the process and then we would do it. But that's not always how it works. Back to that particular workshop, I thought a lot about what it would mean, what it does mean to have a vivid imagination. Is it, like I said a moment ago, to daydream about things, to lose one's self in thoughts that meander and flow, because I do that all the time? Or is it to be creative with a capital C? You know, like a real artist or writer or something. Because though I write quite a bit for my work, I don't think I'm Shakespeare or anything. I'm not a creative with that capital C, like I said. And then, of course, you think, what is imagination? Because one definition that somebody not exclusively said, but said as part of it is, do you dream vivid dreams? I've done just a little bit of dream work workshops, which I learned enough to know that it wasn't for me. I'm glad it is for some people. So I've heard a fair amount about other people's dreams and some interpretation of what dreams tell us about ourselves. Part of the problem for me in doing that work is I almost never remember my dreams. Almost never. And the ones I do, I don't think they're especially special. I'll tell you, one of the very few I do remember was quite vivid in terms of it looked like a movie to me. And it was vivid enough that for years I wasn't entirely sure if it was real or not. I sort of had to remind myself that it was not. But I say that it wasn't all that special because it was a disappointingly common one. Because I had that dream where I had failed a college class because I never attended it, because I didn't know I was enrolled in it. Which, the attention I paid to the enrollment process in college, that actually wasn't that far-fetched, I have to say. But anyway, and as a result of all this, I was going to not get my degree, or I was going to have my degree revoked. I wasn't clear on that in the dream, whether this was before or after I actually graduated. But you've seen this. There are whole movies about this, right? For years, like I said, I had to sort of remind myself that that was not true. I do actually have a degree. In fact, I have multiple degrees now. So is that having a vivid imagination or not? I don't know. And I think of myself as a very grounded, practical person. But we all have some of that imagination stuff, I imagine. That's a joke. This story I told the morning from my grandfather, who was a lot more than a woodworker, by the way. That's the sort of easiest way to describe what he did. But he was also an engineer. He was many things. I think he fancied himself a very grounded, practical sort, as many of those in the trades he worked in, the shop and the foundry and the construction site, probably think of themselves. But there's also no doubt that he had an impressive and rare ability to create things in 3 dimensions from what were handed to him in 2 dimensions. Stephen and I were actually talking about this beforehand, that even things like quilting, which I always think of as a 2-dimensional art, when you actually do it, it's a lot more complicated. Things do not fit together like they should, because you're not actually doing 2-dimensional work. You're doing a very small amount of 3-dimensional work. Anyway, the pattern making he did, I always thought was incredibly impressive. He was extremely precise and created sometimes very complicated pieces of equipment. He was also, and one of the things I most admired about him, he was always on the cutting edge. He always wanted the latest tool. He was into electronic tools and equipment before anyone else I knew was. I'm sure if he was working today, he would be very much into 3D printing because, of course, after all, he was a 3D printer. That was what he did. He made 3D things out of 2-dimensional information. He also, and this is something I find endlessly interesting, he literally wrote the book about what he did, pattern making. His book is called Pattern Making, a Guide. Not the most interesting title ever, unless you're a pattern maker, I suppose, by Ed Hamilton. It's out of print, but used copies go for like $200 now. It's still apparently an important book in the industry. And there are still humans doing physical pattern making, not just with 3D printers, by the way, though they use a lot of that technology now. Okay, enough about him. I wondered what imagination really is, since that question from the workshop has stumped me. And I did something I don't usually do, but once in a while I do it. And I went looking for some great wisdom on the subject, so I Googled quotes about imagination, just to see what was out there. There's some good stuff. I want to share a few with you. From Carl Sagan, imagination will often carry us to worlds that never were, but without it we go nowhere, which is nice. Albert Einstein, I couldn't find a really direct source for this, but he was referenced saying more or less the same thing many times. Imagination is more important than knowledge, he said. That's good. And then the Cheshire Cat, imagination is the only weapon in the war with reality, which I thought was pretty good too. And then Sylvia Plath. By the way, everything in life is writable about if you have the outgoing guts to do it and the imagination to improvise. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt. Now, I liked all of those, and there were dozens and dozens more. I did remind myself of a truism, which is that when you Google famous quotes about anything, you get a lot of white dudes. A lot of white dudes in what they said, and in this case, one white woman. Pretty much no matter what subject you're looking for, too. Of course, it's not as if women or people of color don't have thoughts about imagination or creativity, but you have to do a little more searching to find those because of, well, our culture, I guess. Those are not the ones that have been lifted up over decades and centuries. And so I kept looking, and I found this really good one from Mae Jemison, who, as you may know, was the first African-American woman in space, who said, "Never limit yourself because of others' imagination, and never limit others because of your own limited imagination." I just have to comment on this one because I read more about her after reading this. She also said in interviews that it was her, and I quote directly, youthful arrogance, in part, that helped her succeed. She apparently never thought there was any good reason she shouldn't do what she wanted, so she did it. And then one last quote before I move on. This one from someone I had never heard of before doing this, but the founder and CEO of something called the C method, which helps people to be better public speakers, essentially. Her name is Christina Canters, who said, everyone has creativity within them. It's just a matter of unlocking that creativity. Something we've heard in various forms. Christina Canters is Australian, a former architect, and now a public speaker who, as I said, helps other people become more confident in their own speaking. And I loved her quote because it's what I was sort of thinking. It's that we're all creative, perhaps even imaginative, and it merely takes the right interest or the right support, that team from Earth supporting us that we heard about in our reading today. Or the situation, or perhaps a little bit of prodding to unlock that creativity. Because we all know people that we think of as naturally creative. I'm suspicious anytime I hear the word naturally, because naturally doesn't really usually have anything to do with nature. Or the quote, they've always been that way, or they just have something within them, or to condense this all down to one, they're a natural. I suspect that often, maybe always, means yes, you might have some physical or mental ability in a certain area, but you almost certainly had support in your life from parents who nurtured something in you, or access to resources, or just the opportunity to find that thing that you're good at and love and want to do. And I'm glad we heard about Star Wars Day, because I'm going to talk about it for a second. I wanted to wrap up by talking something meaningful to me in my imaginative life, which is Star Wars. As we already learned today, but I'll say again, those of you in the fandom may know that today is May 4th, Star Wars Day, because May the 4th be with you. A clever little recast of the common phrase from the movies, May the Force be with you. Just to recap, in case you missed the last 50 years of pop culture, in the Star Wars universe, there are some people who are naturally gifted because they have a strong connection to the Force, which is a nebulous power that springs from and connects all life in the universe in which these stories are set. Those with this connection can do things like move objects without physically touching them. Or they have ultra-fast reaction times because they can see something that is about to happen before it does. Or they can even manipulate the minds of some people. But the other thing that I like that's true in this universe is that the Force is within and around and between every living being. And even those who do have that stronger connection to the Force, well, they need training and experience in order to access that connection and to understand in any meaningful way what it means. I think imagination is like that. Whether it's going from not knowing something to knowing something, like seeing how a bandsaw blade can be flipped inside out, or the much greater vision it takes to make a great work of art, and of course the technical expertise to execute that vision. Or the imagination it takes for Mae Jemison to go from Decatur, Alabama, all the way to space as a NASA astronaut. Imagination is something within us and something we have to nurture, something our community can and should support in each of us. With imagination and support, the impossible becomes possible. We can solve problems, we can overcome oppressions, we can create the better world of which we dream. And not by ignoring problems or pretending they don't exist or wishing them away, but by working to solve them in novel ways, with hard work and faith. So friends, on this May 4th, may imagination, creativity, and yes, the Force be with you. May it be so.